Hey everyone, my name is Isaiah and I'm back again to introduce to you a new video in our series Continuing Conversations. Continuing Conversations is a mini series we do after each webinar to give our guests a chance to expand on a topic and give you, the viewer, even more insight so that you can continue the conversation in your community. Today, Matt Anderson sits down with Sixto Council, CEO of Think of Us, about the importance of proximity. Hope you guys enjoy.
All right, Sixto, good to see you, man. How you doing today?
I'm doing pretty good. Really excited to be here again.
Awesome. Yeah, likewise. And before we jump in, just want to say thank you. Thanks for being on our webinar recently. I enjoyed hearing from you, but I know our audience did as well. So with this continuing conversations, we wanted to bring you back and dive back into some of what you were sharing with us. So thanks for doing that, and thanks for being here with us today.
Oh, the pleasure is really mine.
Good deal. All right, let's start with the hard stuff first. What does Think of Us? What is this organization? What do you do?
You know, Matt, it's a funny question because I think unlike a lot of nonprofits, we're structured a little bit differently, which is how do we show up in the world and create proof points that help move system transformation? So we consider ourselves almost like an R&D lab with a set of with a portfolio, with a set of projects. Some of them are short term, some of them are long term, some of them are multi-year. And the whole idea is how do we actually build the evidence for testing and actually centering lived experience in the design, execution, and implementation of a new idea.
Okay, so I've never heard you talk about it that way. It's really interesting because I've always thought that, in child welfare and many other kind of social service fields, we're kind of tied to doing what we've always done or implementing kind of evidence-based practices that were already built by somebody else because we don't have the flexibility to do that kind of research development type of work. It's often not funded. So I'm just curious, what inspired you to go that direction? Why did you choose that pathway for your work?
You know, when we started off the organization, it was supposed to be that we were creating an app, and that the app was something that would help young people create their goals, build a personal advisory board, and then work with the system to accomplish those goals as they transitioned out. In that process, we picked up all of these skills of hacking because there's all of these regulations with the big SACWA system that's now transitioned to CWIS. There's all of this, all of these interviewing and iterations of things that you have to do in order to make an actual technology product. And what we realized as we were going through is that the insights that we're collecting were way beyond just for applying to a product, that the insights had to influence practice, that the insights had to influence mental models, like even the foundation of what we believed. And then when we started to dig even deeper, what we realized is that you had, the beginning of the entire child welfare system, who legislation centered on mitigating risk and keeping young people safe. But it wasn't until about 20, 30 years ago that we really start to have a bigger conversation around healing and well-being and development. And it's only now that it's starting to surface to a point where we're almost at a huge tipping point of no return.
Right. Yeah, interesting. So those early insights around that first project led to this whole approach to I think you used the words develop, thrive, and heal is kind of what you're trying to advance through your kind of innovation and research and development practice. Yeah. And I think there's something that I've always really appreciated about your work and your organization that I want to hear from you more about. But I want to read something from your website because I think it speaks to this, right? So Think of Us, a change firm focused on transforming child welfare by leveraging lived experience and system proximity to drive systems change. So the proximity point is what I think is so important about what you're doing. So it's not a term that we hear all the time, or the way that we approach our work all the time. So I'd love to hear you talk about what is proximity and why is it important?
Yeah, proximity is really the closeness of understanding that you have to the nuances of people's experiences, right? So we can't be effective problem solvers from a distance. And so we have to understand and get comfortable with the suffering that a lot of people go through in order to understand how do we actually solve those problems. And I would say Brian Stevenson is this is a lot of his teaching and his philosophies around how do we literally dig in so far that we now understand this in a different way. We are trying to solve problems all the time in child welfare without having a full context and picture, right? And so without the deeper understanding, we make decisions. And those decisions may not always be the best, or they might be 60% good, which means we still have to figure out how we're going to go ahead and meet the rest of that need.
Yeah, yeah. So Brian Stevenson, founder of Equal Justice Initiative, Just Mercy is his book. So definitely, people should check that out. I'm actually reading his book again right now as we speak. So it's really powerful. And I think one of the things that you're getting at, that he gets at, is that if we want to transform the current state of, for him, criminal justice, for us, child welfare, we can't do it outside of the context of really getting close to the people, the families in our case that we're serving, or the youth that we're serving, and seeing them for the full humanity that we all are, instead of this very narrow lens that we tend to put in our case notes or put in our diagnostics when we assess people, right? So we have to understand the fullness of everybody in order to solve problems, but we also have to engage with people to solve problems too, right? So I know we talk a lot about youth engagement or authentic engagement, power sharing. Like, what does that look like to you in practice when we're really doing it kind of effectively and deeply? And maybe even, what doesn't it look like?
Yeah, when I think about what this looks like, I literally think that engagement is an underrepresentation, because to truly be working in proximity and to truly be centering lived experience, we have to actually integrate lived experience throughout the process. And so at the ideation stage, you are in partnership with the people who are closest to the problem. When you are reviewing, when you're synthesizing data, when you are making judgment calls, when you're literally putting a lens on to make pivotal decisions, existential directions. Like,
Mhm.
that is where lived experience is actually infused at every single point. And then there are different points where it's about including those who have been the closest to the ones who are the closest to the problem, right? And so sometimes we forget some of the importance of that frontline staff person who has seen interventions go crazy because we didn't take into account the cultural factors of the people that we're serving. And so how do we make sure that we have space at the table, not just for those who have the lived experience of the pain, that pain that we're trying to solve to, but then those who have been right there in the immediate circle and understanding their experience and how and what worked and what didn't work for them. And I think that's really what's making think of us different, which is we're living in that intersection where we have the trust of the young people, of young adults who have been in foster care, but also of that frontline staff, of folks who work in interventions. And that's actually has been the secret sauce.
Mm. Yeah. So let's go like one step further with that. If you can maybe share some tools or tips. If so, we have a foster care system that exists today and it's been in place for decades, right? It was not designed in a way that you're describing, with lived experience at the table, kind of co-creating. What do these services, interventions, what does this system need to look like and do to be helpful to people that it serves? Like, that's not the process that we went through. And now we're at this sort of tipping point moment, I think, where we're all talking about a family well-being approach and designing a prevention-based approach. And what are there tools, best practices, as we go forward? What should we do and how can we do it so we don't make some of those same mistakes that we made in the past?
As we go forward. So I think when I think of the system, it's hard to be like, here's the tool, because the reality is like what you said, which is it's not designed to actually withstand that. And so like you can live within the structure, but the pressure of the structure end up wearing people out sometimes. So as I think about this, the immediate thing that comes to mind is, how do we at every single practice point like go the extra mile of asking the person who we're in service to, what is it that they want? What is it that they're like trying to get insights from them, but in a way that it's not for you just to extract information and to fill a document, but to really understand. And I think one of the things that we learned, I'll back up and say, in our H.dot report, which interviewed over 200 young people and staff over 5 different jurisdictions, it was so clear that young people said, paid professionals are always engaging with me to fill out their document. So the conversation goes that way. And so when you have the conversation from the get-go design to go ahead and be compliant, you're reinforcing all the stuff that that designed this system and those conversations and then those experiences. And so to be able to go ahead and move that to say, I just want to be in relationship with you and understand you as a person without me thinking about the compliance piece, and then apply that same information to that document, it makes the difference, and young people can tell that difference.
And I'll share a quick story here. Oftentimes it shouldn't even be about the document, right? I mean, sometimes you have to do that part of the job, but I remember early in my career working with youth aging out of foster care. One young guy in particular, this was about 60 days before he was going to age out, and the team came around to essentially present to him his transition plan. And we all felt good about it. I felt good about it. We all felt good. It's like, okay, here's the plan. Here's what you're going to do for the next 2 months, then post 18. And, we were sitting around the table with him talking about that. And at the end of it, he's like, that's great. That's a nice plan. He's like, I'm going to do that plan. But first, I'm hitchhiking to Alaska and I'm going to work on a fishing boat for about a year. I'm going to make a bunch of money. I'm going to save it. I'm going to come back and then I'll do your plan. Which was basically him just saying, forget your plan because you never sat down with me over the last 6 or 8 months to really understand what my needs, wants, desires, goals are so that we could co-create the plan. And I think it's that on the micro that we need to understand, but then on the macro, if we're going to build a prevention approach, how do we start sitting down with families, talking to them about what would the plan look like? What would the helpful services be?
Yeah. Well, I would even say like the flaw is that there's a plan that has a 6-month check-in and a 3-month check-in, right? So like when we look at the legislation and we look at regulation, some of the things that grind my gears is like, why did we think that for young people who are in the system, that they needed something different than young people who are not in the system? For young people who are living with their biological families or the family that they grew up with, this is a constant iteration. This is a constant conversation, a constant shifting of goals and supports and exposure to new things. And so for young people in the system, we decide that there's a point where we're going to put something on paper, and then that thing is the thing that's going to last until you age out. And so that is part of the flawedness of this system. I'll tell you a little bit. During the pandemic, we were trying to figure out how we would just be helpful, right? Like we took the position that we were not going to go into a big strategic planning situation, that we were not going to reduce cash flow, like cash spending, our monthly burn rate. Like we were like, you know what? It's time to spend more money. There's a crisis, you spend more money. There's people in need, you do more. And one of the things that we figured out that was the most helpful during that time, besides writing people a check, was literally just showing up and doing people's paperwork for the resource that they needed. And so like now in California, we have a statewide program that's looking at kinship care providers and young people, transition age young people. And the whole thing is, how do we just give you a personal assistant for a couple hours to fill out your paperwork and do all the research and follow-up work? Because what people said they needed was that specific thing. So sometimes we're like, oh, what is the big plan? What is the big thing? What is XYZ? And sometimes people are just like, I don't want to do 9 hours of paperwork for these 4 things that I need.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And you're making me think too, back to that story I shared, that was the conversation even about a transition plan? Why are we talking about transition and independence when human beings are interconnected and live in community and we're in relationships? Why are we not talking about his relationship plan, his community plan, his how do I not age out of foster care plan? I mean, oftentimes we're just having the wrong conversations from the get-go because we're really missing the point of what people really truly need. So let me ask you this, and maybe you're referring to this, but I wanted to give you a chance to talk about Check for Us. I know that's a big undertaking that you've got going on right now, so I'd love to hear what that's all about.
Yeah, so Check For Us is a campaign that is focused on connecting current and former foster youth with states so that they can process their pandemic relief funds, right? So Congress gave $400 million to states to go ahead and leverage that money to provide pandemic relief to young people. What we heard from states directly was that they were going to have a bit of a challenge to find young people who've aged out, who've been disconnected for 2 or 3 years. In that they didn't have enough time to figure out, how do you A/B test materials like social media posts? How do you know you're building the right flyer, using the right language to incentivize someone who may have had a bad experience with the system to say, hey, come on down, come back to the system, we're gonna give you a check. Oh, give us your information. What were potentially the unintended consequences of re-engaging the system if you're undocumented? If you had some involvement with the justice system in the past. So we really were in a situation where we had the choice to help a few states or think through what would it look like to run a national campaign. And what I know to be true is that during this pandemic, so many organizations at the community level have organized, and that they have done everything that they can. A lot of organizations are doing everything that they can to help young people. And so what this campaign is about is giving enough of a national scaffolding so that the folks who are on the ground, who see young people, who touch young people every single day, have one place that they can send young people to. And we're going to make sure that those young people get that link to the application for their state. We're going to, in some states, we're sharing directly the contact information with young people's permission with their state to go ahead and start the verification process.
That's cool. Yeah, love it. I mean, we're having that exact challenge right here in North Carolina. We're working on it as we speak. So where can people go to get connected and to tap into that resource?
Definitely visit www.checkforus.org. This was a campaign that was co-created with young people, tested with young people. And, I'll say this thing, I think the most meaningful part of this campaign was actually that the young people who co-created this campaign were very adamant that this was not about money, but about the principle that someone should be checking for us. Someone should be really being there for us in a way that we've always wanted. And so it's it's a moment that we can all gather up to say, this is one solidarity action that we can all do as organizations in this space, which is let's make sure that young people are funneled here.
That's right. I love that. Yeah. Well, Sixto, thank you for all the work that you're doing. Particularly Check For Us. I know this is a time limited effort right now, so I hope everybody gets to the website and gets connected. And it's just always a pleasure to be with you, and I love learning from you. So thanks for having this conversation.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Of course.